Hi, I'm Femi OK. From the worldwide refugee crisis to the fall of the long-time Zimbabwean leader Robert Mugabe and calls for an independent Catalonia, the stream receives tons of great show pitches from you, our online community.
And while we cover as many of your story ideas as possible, we can't get to them all. But today we explore the latest news about 4 important stories you suggested. I'm Malika Bilal, and you're now in the stream, live on Al Jazeera and YouTube.
We start in war-torn Sana'a, where the ongoing humanitarian crisis has reportedly put millions of people right on the brink of starvation. Al Jazeera correspondent Hashem Al-Habara reports on 1,000 days of conflict in Yemen.
But the conflict in Yemen shows no sign of abating. On Tuesday, the Houthis fired a ballistic missile towards the Saudi capital of Riyadh. They say they were targeting a meeting of senior officials at the Yemama Royal Palace. Saudi Arabia accuses Iran of supplying the Houthis with the missile. And as the conflict continues, there are fears of a wider regional confrontation. Meanwhile, the fighting rages near the capital Sana'a. Forces loyal to President Abdrabbu Mansour Hadi are struggling to break Houthi defense lines. Thousands of people have been killed since the start of the conflict in 2015.
My hope is that 2018 comes along with peace and end of aggression and blockade imposed on my country. But I also hope that all the parties come together and build a democratic state.
The Saudi-led coalition's blockade of Yemen has been widely condemned by international agencies, including the United Nations. But it has agreed to temporarily open the Houthi-controlled port of Hodeidah to allow some aid into the country. Will that be enough to help a nation brought to its knees by war? Here with us to explain, in New York City, Radia Al-Mutawakkil is the co-founder of the Muwattana Organization for Human Rights. Welcome to the stream, Radia. I want to start with this tweet from someone whose handle is Yemen Needs Help. They write, Yemen really needs help. If help does not come so quick, I fear the worst could happen. I left Yemen because I didn't know when help would come. Razia, what's the most critical need for civilians in Yemen right now?
The problem that all needs in Yemen now is critical. People, they don't have salaries, there is no medical system, and there is no state, and there is a lot of violations against civilians. So what is more critical, maybe food, but also all the details in Yemen need some certain of help. International NGOs now saying that 22 million people, they need a certain of help or a protection. And this is almost all of us as Yemenis. So whenever we talk about the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, we should remember that it is a man-made disaster.
Radia, when you talk about human rights abuses, can you be a little bit more specific? What have you found out?
All parties to the conflict in Yemen, they commit violations against civilians. Houthis, Saudi Emirati-led coalition, also the forces that is under Hadi government. So it is killing, maiming, detention, landmines, attacking hospitals and schools, torture, forced disappearance, all these kinds of violations civilians are facing in Yemen. And now also drones are playing a role in this, and civilians are affected by these kinds of violations. So it's increasing. It's not, whenever Yemenis say, this is the worst situation, and then it's not going to be worse, then it gets worse and worse with the time.
Well, we got this comment here from Afroz on Twitter who says the situation could have been much better, but the international community is busy estimating, while on the ground, we're already behind time. I know reaching Yemeni people is a big issue, but those having power, meaning the international community, can do much more. What would you say to international actors? What role do you think that they have to play in this future of Yemen?
This is very true. And I can say to the international community, especially US, UK, France, and also Iran, to stop fueling the war in Yemen. What is very sad in Yemen, the peace is always possible, but it never happens. Not because the situation is complicated, but because no one cares. And there is no serious steps toward peace and negotiations. And it is very possible. This is true. It's getting more complicated with time, but still possible.
I want to show our audience, Radia, about what happens to civilians who get caught in the crossfire, get caught in this conflict. This is little Noran. We featured her in a recent Al Jazeera report. Have a look.
I used to go to school on foot. My life was beautiful because I could walk and write. Now I can't walk to school, I can only go with a wheelchair. I used to be able to sit in a chair at my desk and write, but now when I try to write, my hand hurts. I used to love writing, but now I can't even hold a pen.
Radia, how are you able to find out how civilians are doing, how children are doing in Yemen?
Yeah, I like the word that this girl was using. I used to, yeah. Yemen was never good, but the situation was never horrible like this before. So Yemenis, they used to have some life, but now they just lose it. And for children, it's just worse because they are direct victims for the strikes, the indiscriminate shelling. And also they can't go to school anymore. And hospitals and schools are destroyed, and children affected about this. They are also affected by cholera. And they don't have future. Many of them, they just, I mean, if their year is 4 years, then they know nothing about the normal life. And they get very scared because of the sounds of the strikes. So, and what is very sad in Yemen now, it is the unknown future. People, they don't know what's going to be happen, what's next, especially after the clashes in Sana'a. They think that things become more complicated, and they don't know what's going to be happened, who will fight who, and what is the result, because they see after these years of war, there is no military victory, and all authorities controlling the ground, whether in Sana'a or Aden, they have the same attitude regarding people and civilians. They are armed groups who are just controlling the ground in a very bad way. They're supposed to be a state in the south, for example, but there is no state, not in Sana'a and not in Aden.
I want to get this last question from Safia in. She says there's clearly not been enough help from international groups as the situation in Yemen is deteriorating. The question then is, what needs to be done differently for there to be a resolution, because current strategies aren't working? Do you have any hope for a peace process?
I have a very big hope for peace process because I know it's possible. And I want to say thank you to the international NGOs. They are doing a very good work, and also media and many people. But for the states like UK, US, and France, they are fueling the war while they have a lot to do. And they can push for peace process, and they can push for a new resolution. And they need to be pushed from civil society and from media. And yeah, Yemen can be a successful story, and it's going to be very sad if we just lose the chance.
We will continue to follow what's happening in Al Jazeera and cover it. But for now, thank you so much, Radia, for providing us with the very latest. And now we go to the streets of Tegucigalpa in Honduras. The country's presidential election on the 26th of November ignited deadly clashes between protesters and soldiers following the re-election of President Juan Orlando Hernandez by a very slim margin. Check out this report from Al Jazeera's Charlotte Bellis.
Hondurans react to the announcement that Juan Orlando Hernandez is back as president. Supporters of his challenger, Salvador Nasrallah, are convinced of electoral fraud and convinced they can stop Hernandez from taking office. Initial counts suggested the leftist candidate had won. Then the tally was reversed, giving Conservative Hernandez a slim lead. Hernandez's opponents argue he should never have run. The Honduran constitution limits presidents to one term, but 2 years ago the Supreme Court, dominated by judges appointed by Hernandez, ruled the term limits don't apply to him. Then came the allegations of voting irregularities.
Nasrallah recently travelled to Washington, D.C. to plead his case, but Hernandez's victory has already been recognised by a number of governments, including the US, Mexico and Spain. So will Nasrallah accept his apparent defeat, or will his supporters continue to demand that Hernandez step down? Joining us in Honduras, Sandra Cuff is a freelance journalist and she's reported widely on the country. Sandra, good to have you here. I want to start with some of your pictures. Have a look here on my laptop. Voices from the barricades, protests against election fraud intensify in Honduras. You were out there on the streets reporting. What did you see? What's going on here?
Those are nighttime barricades. So a lot of the media coverage is sort of focused on the top level things, what the political parties are saying, Nasrallah going to the United States. But I think it's really important to know that on the ground all over Honduras, there are ongoing protests, road blockades, barricades. So this is in neighborhoods of Tegucigalpa at night, and it's people taken to the streets. The fires are crossing main roads and arteries in the city. And so this is all to denounce electoral fraud. And all of those pictures were from just a few days ago. So on this past Sunday, on December 17th, the Electoral Tribunal recognized the current president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, as the winner. And the Opposition Alliance supporters and people around the country are not recognizing the legitimacy of that announcement and of the presidency. So the crisis is ongoing. And I just wanted to clarify at the beginning, you'd said something about deadly or violent clashes between protesters and soldiers. So there have been more than 25 people killed. Most of those are protesters by security forces. There's really violent repression against protests and road blockades around the country, and that state violence, this isn't a equal fight in the streets. So it's state violence, opening fire on protesters. That's been condemned by the UN, the OAS, and others.
I want to bring this point up to you. This is a tweet we got from Vienna, and she says, I believe I speak for 80% of Hondurans when I say that unfortunately, it seems like the only way of correcting such a corrupted election process is with the OAS proposal for new elections. We know Salvador won, but the current government will never accept it. A second round is consequently our last and only resource. I want to hone in on that 80%, though. Of course, that's an unscientific poll there, but what is public opinion like when it comes to this?
Well, when the initial results, so the elections were held, like you mentioned, on November 26th, and after polls closed more than 9 hours later, the initial results that were released had Salvador Nasrallah, the opposition candidate, with a 5-point lead. And so, there were a bunch of system crashes, all sorts of irregularities. The Organization of American States isn't recognizing or validating the results of the election. They had election observers on the ground. And so that's where the proposal for new elections has come from. So I can't really comment on the 80%. Definitely, it seems quite clear that Nasrallah had that supposedly irreversible 5-point lead. And I also think that since the elections, the government implemented a state of exception. More than 24 people have been killed, including a young girl just the other day up north. And so I think probably since the election, there's probably even more opposition to the government, given the outcome of the election and what's been going on since.
Sandra, on your Twitter feed, you have this pinned to the top. They want to impose a president on us, Angelica Medrano said at a nighttime street blockade in her neighborhood. We don't want a dictator. From your inside reporting, your reporting on the street, what do you think might happen next?
For now, I think this crisis is going to continue. So protests and roadblocks are going to continue. Repression will probably continue. The only proposal that might sort of, change the current situation is probably in some form, new elections or a second round of elections. And, today, for example, just in less than 3 hours, there's going to be another mass mobilization outside the U.S. Embassy. I think that's another thing that really hasn't had enough focus on it, is the U.S. role in all of this. People widely see the U.S. as having legitimized an extremely flawed process, contrary to, the OAS electoral mission. So yeah, for now, unless something serious changes, it's going to be ongoing protests, ongoing road blockades around the country, and probably ongoing repression.
So looking at the ongoing protests, I wonder, though, what comes after that? This is what we got from Maria. She says, I believe this illegal re-election, as she calls it, will bring irreparable consequences to our country. What do you think those consequences might be from what you're hearing from people that you talk to?
Just that it's going to be conflict. Nobody believes at the moment in anything state institutions say, or in the judicial system, or in any security forces. And so it's, in some ways, it's similar to the 2009 coup d'etat. which deposed then President Manuel Zelaya, who's actually the coordinator of the current opposition alliance against the dictatorship. He's not the presidential candidate, but he's the coordinator. And so after the coup, you had some countries recognize the post-coup regime, others not, and you had literally months and months of resistance in the streets and of state security forces acting out against protesters. So hopefully that's not going to be the case here. But definitely, it's a Catholic and Christian country. Christmas is coming up. Everyone expects to be in the streets over the holidays and beyond.
Sandra, we'll be keeping an eye out. Thank you for joining us to share your reporting. Now to the outskirts of Freetown, Sierra Leone, where a devastating mudslide in August killed hundreds. Take a look at this video reported by Al Jazeera's Nina Debris.
This is where hundreds of survivors have been living since their homes were destroyed from the mudslide that killed at least 500 people. Sierra Leone's government is giving the displaced cash compensation, almost $700 for each family, but there's concern over whether they will actually get everything promised. Authorities say the camps are officially closed now. The process of moving people out, though, will take time. They say they will not tell anyone to leave until they have their compensation. Hundreds of children also lost parents in the disaster. The government says it will build an additional 1,000 homes for those affected.
So this story about Sierra Leone and the mudslides was pitched to me on Twitter by Samuel Corker. Have a listen to what he had to say about the mudslide.
I choose to highlight the plight of my people as the victims of the mudslide because of the inadequate response that they have received from their government, and also the lack of meeting their basic needs. The international community have provided enough resources to meet the needs of these people, but because of corruption in the country, these people's needs will never be met.
But joining us on the phone in Freetown to give more on this story, Abubakar Tarawali is a spokesman for the Sierra Leone Red Cross. Welcome to the stream, Abubakar. Now, you heard in that video from Samuel about an inadequate government response. That's what we're hearing all across the board from people who are tweeting to us. This is Adriette, who says, we need the government to publicly account for what exactly has been done with all the funds that were provided by international as well as local donors. And so far, none has been forthcoming. Have enough funds gotten to victims and survivors of the mudslide?
Well, I sincerely think that the deadly mudslides and floods of August that left many lives of Sierra Leoneans lost and many homes destroyed have been adequately responded to, as far as I am concerned, as far as the Red Cross perspective is concerned. Over the last weeks and months of the emergency response, we have paid a lot of attention to maintaining displaced and affected populations in camps and neighboring communities, helping them plan for their transition and reintegration back into their normal everyday lives.
Right.
I mean, so as far as I am concerned, and even now, as we are talking, there is what we refer to as the early recovery process that is also being provided support to, through to people that are victims of this disaster. From the emergency response, the Red Cross continues to work with other partners and stakeholders to support the recovery from the floods and the landslide.
I just want to remind people what you're having to recover from. This is Alex, and this video was put out by your organisation. This was back in August. Have a listen to what Alex had to go through.
So 6:15, my wife woke up and said, "This is not time for sleeping, no, wake up everybody." We saw the water flowing everywhere. And we are standing there when the wall broke from my room. It was only fortunate that we are not where the bed where we are sleeping was. Everything was destroyed. There is an unfinished house here. There we are now fighting for our survival.
So the immediate crisis is over, Abubakar, but how about people getting back into their homes? Is that possible?
Well, evidently, many homes were wiped out. Hundreds of lives were lost, and hundreds are still believed to be missing. But the fact remains that tremendous work has been put into trying to take care and respond to their plight as far as the Red Cross is concerned. And a lot is still being done in collaboration with stakeholders in the country, with support, of course, from our partners, both within and outside Sierra Leone. Like I have said, just judging from the clip that you just played, you would realize that it was a really very bad situation, which warranted the Red Cross to mobilize its volunteers and personnel to be at the forefront as usual, providing the usual support to address the most urgent needs. I mean, when there are disasters, you would want to address the most urgent needs and providing timely, relevant, and actionable and life-enhancing information, as well as providing victims with food and non-food items. So what also follows, as I've been saying, is also trying to support them to deal with those life basic needs that were destroyed and affected, like hygiene and sanitation facilities, access to clean and pure drinking water, some of the relevant social amenities that were destroyed.
Right.
So basically what the Red Cross is doing now is helping with new boreholes in areas in the affected communities for improved access to pure drinking water.
And Abubakar, I hear you there. I want to get in one more comment because this is someone who's an activist and she's close to this story. This is what Josephine told the stream.
The fact is, some of these people living in disaster-prone areas are staying there because of their livelihood activities, like fish farming, wood logging, hunting, etc. We actually have not presented any alternative livelihood activities to them, and government, with every single donation received during the September 16, 2015 flooding to the August 14 mudslide in 2017, have not done any sustainable recovery.
Our thanks to Josephine Kamara for leaving that video and to Abubakar for updating us on recovery efforts in Sierra Leone.
And finally, a story that got our online community in Nigeria buzzing. The Nigerian law school reportedly denied Amosa Firdaus Abdulsalam her call to the bar because she refused to remove her hijab.
Well, this story was pitched to the stream by several people, including Aisha Muhammad, who said the issue sparked a debate about freedom of expression. Now, many people tweeted their support using the hashtag #JusticeForFirdaus. Others tweeted pictures of practicing barristers, like that one, wearing hijab elsewhere in the world. But some criticized Firdaus's stance. PCO tweets, if you can't respect the school's rules, how can you respect the law of the country?
So we spent the last 12 hours looking for Firdaus. Thank you, our online Twitter community in Nigeria. We found her. She's lying low right now, not doing any media. But we did speak to Aisha Zubair. She is a colleague of Firdaus, and she encountered a very similar challenge regarding the wearing of her hijab. Have a look.
The text of the Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. I was asked to remove my hijab at the entrance of the court to bar. It was a really hard decision for me to make. I'd never removed my hijab in public before, but I did. And when I entered the podium, when I entered the hall, it was hard for me to continue without my hijab. I just had to put it back on. And when I was called to the podium to receive my certificate, I went there with my hijab. I received the certificate. There was no objection from the body of benchers seated or even the invited guests. And as I was going back to my seat, the lecturer followed me. She insisted I remove the hijab. And when I removed it, she threw it on the floor. She rubbed it on the floor. She kicked it around. And she asked the guard to stand by it so I could not retrieve it. I was bare. It was the most embarrassing moment of my whole life. So she seized my certificate for daring to wear the hijab to the podium. So it's really hard. I'm sure there are so many sisters out there that it's really hard for.
Hashtag Justice for Firdaus. We'll be following it on hashtag AJStream. Thank you, guests. Thank you, online community. And thank you to our fantastic director, Katie Travers. It's not often that we get to call the shots, but we're going to right now. We'd like a control room shot. Thank you very much. Katie Travers has been our director for this show and for many shows over the years. She's moving on from the stream. We love you, Katie. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody. See you online.